Our culture convicts people every day to charges of conspiracy in our legal systems. But for some reason, those of the upper echelons of the power seem to get a pass. Throughout the ages, it has always been understood that those in power seek more control. Whether it's religious expansion, imperial expansion, colonial expansion, military expansion, it's about taking over land and valuables, declaring control, indoctrinating the people into your system of beliefs. Good men judge the world by the way they live it themselves. Evil men greatly depend on good men to believe this, because they manipulate, take advantage of, oppress, and loot off the honest. September 11th is the catalyst that changed America forever. Were there any state sponsors involved with the attacks of September 11th? The official version of 9/11 maintains no foreign governments or domestic authorities were complicit with the attacks or involved in the cover-up of September 11th. This investigation will explore the overwhelming evidence that foreign governments' intelligence agencies played a substantial role in some way in the attacks. Our story starts with Dr. David Graham, a dentist in Shreveport, Louisiana, who met a Pakistani man who housed 2 future 9/11 hijackers who turned out to be Saudi intelligence agents. The question is, who was in the shadows of September 11th?
He claimed he met 3 of the 9/11 hijackers in Shreveport a year before the attacks. This morning, local dentist David Graham is dead after the family says he was poisoned more than 2 years ago. At the time, Graham was trying to publish a manuscript about meeting 3 Middle Easterners in Shreveport. He feared they were plotting to bomb Barksdale. Graham wrote that he warned the FBI. Then after 9/11, he saw their pictures among the hijackers.
Dr. David Graham had alerted Representative Congressman Jim McCreary, who in turn gave the information over to a member of the Joint Select Committee on Intelligence, Saxby Chambliss. Graham was detailing the fact that he contacted the FBI about 3 men, who would later become 9/11 hijackers, that Graham had observed planning terrorism 10 months prior to 9/11.
Muslim, Arab type fellows, and what you're about to hear is very disturbing, and I hope it gets to the Intelligence Committee. It's going to be, the Senate's going to be, I believe, hearing all the reports of some ways that we can improve the handling of 9/11-01, should it happen again, something of that nature.
Representative Chambliss wrote back to Graham that he had given the information to Chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Porter Goss. In the fall of 2000, Dr. Graham inadvertently met the future 9/11 hijackers in Shreveport, Louisiana.
I'm sitting in front of Nawaf al-Hazmi, and the picture I saw after 9/11 in USA Today is the same look he gave me and stared at me like this for about 10 minutes. I mean, his eyes were piercing right through me, no smile, no crack of anything. You might want to focus in on this picture. Now, he was clean shaven when I saw him, this fella right here, Nawaf al-Hazmi. This appeared October 5th, 2001 in USA Today. And trust me, that is the guy I was looking at in 3521 Eastwood Drive in Mohammed Jamal Khan's apartment. It was definitely the same man.
Graham made a video will to detail his story and provide his evidence, for he speculated that he was not going to be taken seriously by Porter Goss for his whistleblowing. He feared for his life after clandestinely recording himself and a Pakistani man, Jamal Khan, who Graham claimed hosted 3 of the 9/11 hijackers.
Before Graham was poisoned, he was supposed to testify at a deportation hearing against a Pakistani man, Jamad Khan, who hosted the men Graham believed to be the hijackers.
Khan was from an area of Pakistan in the north, known to be very sympathetic to bin Laden, and also where many believe bin Laden was hiding. Graham provided all the evidence for his story in the video.
And I got a map, and I saw where Karachi was down on the coast. When I talked to Jamal the next day, I said, Jamal, I said, is your family, is your father, is this place down on the coastline? I love the big boats. I like to go out on those big boats. He said, oh, no. My father's place is up by the China Wall. And he said it's up by the China Wall over by Russia. So this little yellow spot I've outlined here, there's some little cities up there I'd like to mention that are possibly significant to where maybe bin Laden could be hiding, and that's what Agent Spoon, after 9/11, indicated to me.
Graham initially feared a truck bombing on Barksdale Air Force Base due to the suspicious red flags he was observing with men he remotely associated with. Graham reported to both a Shreveport FBI agent and a U.S. Secret Service agent the information almost a year before 9/11. Within the Graham report, a book David wrote detailing his story so that the public would know this scandal. He details and provides the dated and certified documents that the FBI had names of 2 9/11 ringleaders, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar.
But in terms of 9/11, in terms of them going after somebody in the Bible Belt who, was a conservative, Christian, megachurch, evangelical, I mean, that's really desperate that they have to kill somebody like that. But he was on the verge of publishing a book, and his book was going to talk about this 4-year ordeal that he had when he met Nawaf al-Hazmi and had an association with somebody who knew Khalid al-Mihdhar. And al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi, we know now, according to the 9/11 Commission report and others, were 2 of the lead hijackers. It wasn't just about Mohammed Atta, it was about these 2 guys. We know now that they were most likely agents of Saudi intelligence.
Graham's 9/11 report was never published. Graham's story is not detailed at all in the 9/11 Commission report. Why did Porter Goss ignore Graham while sitting on the Intelligence Committee? Two of the 3 hijackers Graham met were living openly and even applied for driver's licenses using their actual identities in San Diego, while both of their identities were on terror watch lists for having attended a major al-Qaeda meeting just prior. They were listed as al-Qaeda operatives.
A closer look now at criticism of the U.S. intelligence community. In the current issue of Newsweek magazine, writer Michael Isikoff reports that the CIA was actively tracking 2 of the suspected September 11th hijackers and even trailed those men pictured here to an al-Qaeda summit in Malaysia.
The CIA knew who they were. They knew that they were suspected al-Qaeda operatives, and they failed to alert the INS, the State Department, the Customs Service, agencies that could have kept them out of the country, and perhaps more importantly, they failed to alert the FBI, which could have tracked them while they were in the country. What's stunning is that from that moment on, they lived entirely out in the open. They opened up bank accounts, they got a California driver's license, they opened up credit cards, and they intersected with at least 5 other of the hijackers on September 11th. This is probably the biggest intelligence failure surrounding the events of September 11th of all.
In September of 2000, they moved in with an FBI informant, Abdus Sadr Sheikh. Abdus Sadr was working closely with the FBI on terror cases.
CBS's Jim Stewart has new information tonight about a tense standoff between the widely criticized FBI and Congress over a witness.
A congressional committee investigating the September the 11th hijackings met behind closed doors today to hash out what appears to be an increasingly ugly confrontation with the FBI. At issue is the testimony of an FBI informant who apparently played landlord to 2 of the 9/11 hijackers and never informed his case agent of the renters until after the attacks. The 2 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, were the only members of the group to enter the U.S. through the West Coast. closed. For several months, they lived in this San Diego residence where their landlord was this man, identified as Abdussader Sheikh, a prominent San Diego Muslim leader.
But just before heading to California, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar were being actively tracked by the CIA.
NBC News in depth tonight. Could the September 11th attacks on America have been prevented? We're now just 2 days away from the release of the final report of the commission investigating those attacks. The report will not say the attacks could have been prevented by either the Clinton or Bush administrations, in part because the commission wants to avoid partisan fighting over its report in this election year.
That day, it seemed sudden and without warning. But 3 years and 2 investigations later, it's clear there was a tragic trail of missed opportunities to stop some of the hijackers, disrupt the plot, and perhaps save 3,000 lives. The Malaysia meeting. January 2000, top al-Qaeda operatives converge on Kuala Lumpur for a planning meeting that includes these 2 hijackers. The first time a hijacker comes on the radar of American intelligence.
The intelligence agencies also had electronic intercepts. The NSA monitors 2 million communications every hour. Telephone calls, faxes, emails, including, we now know, critical clues about the hijackers, like their meeting in Malaysia.
It was actionable information. And what's clear to me as a former intelligence officer is that somebody in Washington dropped the ball. Whether it was FBI or CIA is to be determined.
It's one of these critical nodes where we could have disrupted the 9/11 plot well before it ever got off the ground.
The calls. Once in the U.S., that hijacker gets up to a dozen calls from this known al-Qaeda switchboard in Yemen. The NSA is listening, but doesn't figure out that the calls are to someone inside the U.S. The search. In late August, the CIA finally tells the FBI 2 hijackers may be in the country, but the FBI can't find them, even though they're listed in the San Diego phone book. The watch lists. The 2 hijackers are finally watch listed, but never put on the FAA's no-fly list. Up a back stairwell to the 4th floor of the Capitol, behind closed doors, Congressional Intelligence Committees meeting in a special soundproof room today began sifting through the debris of 9/11. Sources say some 200 interviews and 100,000 pages of documents reviewed so far reveal even more dropped balls by both the CIA and FBI than is now publicly known. The most critical dropped ball, investigators say, is that the CIA identified 2 of the hijackers as terrorists a year and a half before the attacks. Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi knew they were headed to this country and did almost nothing until it was too late. Sources tell NBC News the FBI has developed a series of charts for congressional investigators to show that had there been follow-up, al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar would have led them directly to 5 other hijackers, and by connecting the dots to everyone else, including ringleader Mohammed Atta.
And it was largely due to the fact that these 2 men, al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar, were living with the FBI's informant, Abdussader Sheikh. Sheikh was identified in wire reports as a retired professor of English at San Diego State. He was also listed as Vice President of International Projects at the American Commonwealth University. The problem is, Sheikh never taught at San Diego State. He never taught English at all. He possessed a phony PhD from a bogus diploma mill with U.S. military and intelligence connections out of Florida. American Commonwealth University doesn't exist. And it's merely a mail drop, which was previously named William Lyon University. And William Lyon University was founded by the retired Air Force General William Lyon. And Lyon was chairman of the GOP's Team California Victory 2004. And he was a member of the Orange County's new majority big wheel Republican network that helped get Arnold Schwarzenegger elected. What is Abdussader Sheikh, a man housing the future 9/11 hijackers, doing with false identities provided to him by U.S. government officials, connected to top-level GOP officials in California? Many wonder why this was. Omar al-Boyami is said to be a Saudi intelligence officer of the GID, the General Intelligence Directorate. The GID is the Saudi Arabian equivalent to the CIA. He was the man who picked up the two hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, from LAX. What is a Saudi Arabian intelligence agent working at the Saudi Arabian embassy in Los Angeles doing, picking up two future 9/11 hijackers and then sending them to an FBI informant?
Now, if we could go back to Senator Bob Graham, he brought out a book right around the time that he was retiring called Intelligence Matters. He still was trying to do a good job talking about the protection of these 9/11 hijackers in the U.S. And the certain Saudis connected to the Saudi embassy in L.A. who, and specifically a guy named Bayoumi and another guy, these two Saudis were closely connected to the Saudi embassy in LA. So when Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar come to this country, they go to LA, they happen to meet these guys, you know, and even Graham says it's not a coincidence, they happen to meet these guys. These guys are protective, they say, come live in San Diego, you'll like it better. And we only know about this, I think, from a leak. I think like somebody happened to leak it to us, because the FBI was extremely embarrassed that this came out, you know. It looks like extreme incompetence. Well, that's what they argue it is, but really it's obviously something more. It's obviously part of this pattern of federal protection that the 9/11 hijackers were given. His book is so good on the first couple of steps of showing federal protection of the 9/11 hijackers. How does this jibe with Able Danger? Because this is a whole other topic. Able Danger is this military intelligence operation that almost stopped al-Qaeda in early winter 2000, and yet they were stopped by Pentagon top brass, higher-ups, high above, supervising this military intelligence operation. Able Danger protected these 9/11 hijackers, claimed that you can't spy on U.S. citizens. It's like, wait a minute, these guys weren't U.S. citizens, they were Saudi citizens. You know, since when are Saudi citizens U.S. citizens? Since when are Saudi agents of intelligence given these rights?
Was the commission that investigated the 9/11 attacks told that lead hijacker Mohammed Atta had been identified and as al-Qaeda operative more than a year before terrorists struck?
Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer is a Bronze Star recipient who told congressional staff members from the 9/11 Commission that a secret military unit working with the international intelligence apparatus and the Defense Intelligence Agency had identified two of the three cells involved in the 9/11 attacks, as well as alleged ringleader Mohammed Atta, over a year before the attacks.
Schaefer says the commission never got the whole story.
I'm told confidently by the person who did move the material over that the 9/11 Commission received two briefcase-size containers of documents. I can tell you for a fact that would not be 1/20th of the information that Able Danger consisted of during the time we spent.
The 9/11 Commission was told information on Able Danger, but for some reason completely left it out of their report.
They never got the story on Able Danger. I can tell you right now emphatically the 9/11 Commission doesn't have a clue. Now they may say, well, we asked the Defense Department for this information. Well, that's just passing the buck.
So what did Able Danger do with the information?
Schaefer says his unit linked Atta to al-Qaeda leaders, but would not provide any specifics.
It was over a year before the attacks, and the top-level classified spy program made the decision to bring the FBI in to take out the cells they were monitoring.
As to what he did with the information he had,
we attempted to, first off, use it operationally. The lawyer said you can't do that. Therefore, at that point in time, we made a determination as a team that we should move this information to the FBI.
But he says beginning in September 2000, 3 meetings he set up with the FBI were each canceled by military lawyers.
Able Danger was not monitoring random suspects, but specifically the cells involved in the future 9/11 attacks. Able Danger specifically could have arrested and entirely prevented the attacks themselves.
And I'm quoting how I remember saying it. We found, as part of the data run, we found 2 of the 3 cells which conducted the 9/11 attacks, to include Atta.
When Able Danger was called to the Senate investigations, the Pentagon attempted to prevent the sharing of the information and asked for secret closed-door hearings without the media present.
Pentagon reportedly does not want the public to hear next week's Senate testimony about the former secret intelligence unit known as Able Danger. 2 congressional sources have told Fox News that the military's pressuring senators to move the hearings behind closed doors. But we're told the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Arlen Specter, wants to keep the hearings open. People who claim they used to work with the Able Danger Unit say that unit identified as threats 4 of the September 11th hijackers a full year before the attacks.
I assigned the same core team of analysts that worked the JCAG project. And along with Dr. Eileen Pricer as the analytical lead, 4 of us conducted data mining analysis on the Al-Qaeda terrorist network coordinating with SOCOM and other organizations throughout that time. In the months that followed, we were able to collect an immense amount of data for analysis that allowed us to map Al-Qaeda as a worldwide threat with a surprisingly significant presence within the United States.
Weldon, a Republican congressman, was the individual who called for the investigation, which he believed was the most important story in our nation related to 9/11, which was the fact that this specific group tried to stop the attacks, but were not allowed to. This was potentially the biggest scandal in our nation's history since Iran-Contra, and very few news outlets seemed to cover this detail. Able Danger collected over 2.5 terabytes of information on the Al-Qaeda operations, including the majority of the few cells operating inside the United States, participating in the planning of 9/11. So what happened to the information? It was deleted.
What knowledge, if any, do you have about the allegation of a destruction of documents?
The allegation of destruction of documents is correct. I'm the one who deleted all the documentation that we had gathered at the IDC.
And you deleted the data?
Yes, sir.
What kind of information was deleted?
Everything that we had.
Well, what was the essential substance of it?
We had done internet polls related to a preliminary analysis of Able Danger. And what I mean by that is we were trying to get a worldwide perspective of exactly where this organization functioned and operate just as a start. And that was in terms of Al-Qaeda.
The majority of the members involved in the military program were ordered to stay silent or face consequences.
For the life of me, I don't understand why, as I understand it, I stand corrected if I'm wrong, but I understand the witnesses we assumed we were going to get to hear from the Defense Department have been pulled. They may be or may not be in the room, but have been instructed that they cannot testify.
They were gagged. Only one member spoke at the Senate investigation. The charts and documents that they had in their unit were conveniently destroyed, and no one person would ever be allowed to verify their claims. And the individual who deleted the information was also asked if he too could verify that what he deleted confirmed that the unit had identified Mohammed Atta, specifically as a terrorist in the United States planning an attack for Al-Qaeda.
Are you in a position to evaluate the credibility of Captain Philpott, Colonel Schaefer, Mr. Westphal, Ms. Preisler, Mr. J.D. Smith, as to their credibility when they say they saw Mohammed Atta on a chart?
Yes, sir. I believe them implicitly from the time that I'd worked with all of them, and everyone you had mentioned was part and I had contact with during this time.
So how were the members who went public dealt with by their superiors?
A Pennsylvania congressman says there's a smear campaign going on inside the Pentagon, and he wants the defense chief to get to the bottom of it. Republican Congressman Curt Weldon says Pentagon officials are trying to ruin one of their own who's gone public about a top-secret military intel unit. This is the unit called Able Danger that claims to have ID'd the top 9/11 hijacker a full year before the attacks. Catherine Herridge in the Fox Report, live from our Washington newsroom. Catherine.
Yeah, Republican Congressman Curt Weldon is calling for a new probe into what he describes as a witch hunt by defense officials against a member of Able Danger, the secret military intelligence team that claims to have identified lead hijacker Mohammed Atta 1 year before the attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who was the first member of Able Danger to go public, has now been told in writing by the Defense Intelligence Agency that he can't speak to members of Congress or their staff without prior approval. And now a security clearance, which allowed him to deal with classified information, has been pulled. The congressman says Schaefer has been gagged, punished for speaking up.
It's obvious to me this is a clear attempt to silence this guy
but now even more than to silence him, to ruin him as a person and a military officer. I've talked to all the Able Danger players, and they all agree this is a witch hunt against Tony. It's wrong, it's un-American, it's unacceptable.
In a recent letter to Secretary Rumsfeld, the congressman writes, "You know as well as I that inside the Beltway, there's a time-honored tradition of smearing the accuser rather than answering the charge. That method is now apparently being employed in your department, and while it may be a familiar way of doing business in Washington, it is no less disappointing." The congressman wants the Defense Department's internal watchdog, the Inspector General, to investigate whether Schaefer has been targeted for speaking out, and Weldon says the head of the House Armed Services Committee is backing the request. According to several published reports, the Defense Intelligence Agency has had no comment on the congressman's allegations.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to offer my comments surrounding the use of security clearance system as a method of intimidation and retaliation, and in my case, DI removal of my security clearance based on my protected disclosures of information to the 9/11 Commission and to Congress regarding Operation Able Danger. Many of us take seriously our oath of office to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We demonstrate our commitment by decades of service to this country, trying to conduct operations to ensure our citizens are protected. There are officers within the bureaucracy who abandon their oath of office and instead become focused on a strategy of self-preservation, of obstruction of accountability. A culture now exists in which leaders with this abhorrent set of values are in charge of large portions of the intelligence community.
The staffer on the 9/11 Commission for Jamie Gorelick was Dieter Snell. Dieter Snell was the one who interviewed Scott Philpott in July of '04. It was Dieter Snell, an Annapolis graduate, and a man who will take over the command of one of our destroyers in January. His credibility has never been challenged by anyone in the Pentagon. It was Scott Philpott who was debriefed by Dieter Snell, who buried the story and did not allow the 9/11 commissioners to receive the facts of Able Danger. In fact, in talking to Scott Philpott, he gave me a direct quote from Dieter Snell. Now remember that Congress, in a bipartisan vote, established the commission to get the facts about 9/11. And the facts obviously involved Al-Qaeda and obviously involved Mohammed Atta. In July of '04, a Navy officer, Annapolis grad, voluntarily goes in to debrief the 9/11 Commission staff, and he mentions that he will swear on his entire life career that he identified Mohammed Atta in January of 2000, and that his team had a chart with Mohammed Atta's name on it and face on it, but also that he saw that chart over and over again. It wasn't a one-time glance. And he also told Dieter Snell that they tried to transfer that information to the FBI. This was Dieter Snell's response, quote, "What do you want us to do with this information? We go to print in 10 days, end quote.
And one other interesting note, Tom, we've also learned at NBC that there was a President Bush in the White House during the morning of these events. His father, former President Bush, was actually at the White House the morning of the attack.
The bin Laden family are in the Carlyle Group and were meeting on the morning of 9/11 discussing the coming year's financial ventures. Bush Sr., another chairman at Carlyle, was meeting with bin Laden's father and brother, where both of them were to be intimately affected by the day's outcome on completely opposite sides of the spectrum. Carlyle is a defense contracting firm, so they both conveniently would be profiting from the war resulting in the attacks that they were witnessing take place on television. While Americans couldn't fly, the bin Ladens were flown out of the country.
One more story. Yesterday, in the first couple of hours of this, when all American, all U.S. air carriers were ordered to land at the nearest airport, this was taken very seriously. One of our photographers noticed a military jet trailing closely a civilian airliner in the vicinity of Washington, D.C. He was in Arlington at the time. By the time he swung his camera up, it was out of frame, so we have only 2 or 3 seconds of video of it. But this was taken very seriously yesterday.
To ensure safe passage back to Saudi Arabia, the bin Ladens were flown out of the country with military escorts for protection without answering any questions by investigators. Protected on their aerial evasion from U.S. authorities by U.S. military, while all planes were grounded in the United States. to which even high-ranking U.S. officials could not travel. The bin Ladens were allowed to fly.
How did Osama bin Laden's family flee America? Let's go to CNN's Brian Todd. Brian?
Wolf, in those frightful days after 9/11, U.S. intelligence dealt with a fog of information, and these newly released documents seem to add to the confusion. More than a week after the attacks, a couple of days after more than 100 Saudi nationals, including members of Osama bin Laden's family, are flown out of the U.S. on chartered flights, an FBI document mentions one of the flights. Quote, the plane was chartered either by the Saudi Arabian royal family or Osama bin Laden. The plane in question left on September 19th. The FBI document was written on September 21st. Was the FBI still not sure if bin Laden was involved in arranging a flight carrying his family members even after it had left?
You may recall that the bin Laden family, some of them were here in the Orlando area, and now more on how they got out of the country. Bob.
That's right, Claire. We've already taken a look at some parts of this report, and on pages 329 and 330, they deal directly with the issue of whether the members of the bin Laden family were given preferential treatment to flee Orlando and other cities without the proper scrutiny. Let's show you some video that was taken exclusively by News Channel 2 8 days after 9/11. That man there is Osama bin Laden's younger brother Khalil, who had been here vacationing with other family members there on an estate that they owned in West Orange County. Now,
but I feel, frankly, abandoned. If I question anything about the official story, I'm called a conspiracy theorist. When the first news reporter from my local area in upstate New York came to tell me she was going to allow me to tell a beautiful story of my daughter, all I asked that day was, why could I not fly home from Toronto? But Osama bin Laden's family and some Saudi nationals whose names I still don't know were flown out of the country in our airspace. I was grounded. They were not.
According to the former chief consular officer in Saudi Arabia who blew the whistle on the joint CIA-Al-Qaeda visa fraud scandal that took place while he was there, J. Michael Springman worked for the United States government for 20 years with the Foreign Service and Consulate. He claimed that the CIA was overriding visa decisions made in Saudi Arabia and protecting Al-Qaeda operatives in getting them to the United States to be trained and have returned for covert programs in the Middle East.
I began with the federal government in 1969, taking a job in the Bureau of International Commerce at the U.S. Department of Commerce. While I was there, I had been working my way through the International Trade Administration, doing some trade show promotions, and got myself assigned to Stuttgart as a commercial officer in the State Department's State Commerce Exchange Program. Went on to India as the first foreign commercial service officer, and then got into the real State Department, and as a reward got sent to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where I was chief of the non-immigrant visa section. I had discovered what I thought was visa fraud, and it wasn't until I was out of the Foreign Service, ran into Joe Trento, the journalist, plus a couple of other people. One worked for the government, one worked for a local university. They told me that what I was questioning was not visa fraud, but a program to recruit terrorists for the Afghan war. And when I protested this to people in Jeddah, to the consulate, to the embassy, and to the Bureau of Consular Affairs in Washington, I was met with total indifference, despite the fact that the punishment for visa fraud is something like 10 years in jail and a fine of $250,000.
15 of the hijackers were in the United States on visas obtained from a program in Saudi Arabia. Only 3 of them were interviewed by a consular official. The Visas Express program started in June 2001 and allowed visas to be given automatically without interviews or background checks. The program was initiated only in Saudi Arabia, which is a nation known to have a large population of animosity towards the United States, which is sympathetic to the nation's own native, Osama bin Laden. This visa program was only introduced in Saudi Arabia while no other such privilege was or has ever been extended to any of the allies or Western European friends of the United States. Michael Springman blew the whistle and stated that State Department officials were issuing visas to terrorists, which he knew were terrorists, but he was being gagged.
The 19 hijackers were able to get into the United States despite information on their travel documents that should have raised some big red flags. Could it happen again? Here's NBC Justice Department correspondent Pete Williams.
It's a myth, the report says, that all the 19 hijackers entered the U.S. legally. Some clearly did, like hijacker leader Mohammed Atta, whose actual visa is shown publicly for the first time. But 3 of the hijackers on board the plane that crashed into the Pentagon had on their visa applications what the report calls indicators of Islamic extremism linked to al-Qaeda. The 3 were Khalid al-Midar, Salem al-Hazmi, whose state-issued ID cards are shown here, and al-Hazmi's brother Nawaf. Of the actual hijacker passports, only this burned fragment of Ziad Jarrah's is shown, recovered from the wreckage of Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania. But the report says when 2 other hijackers applied for their visas, their documents contained another warning sign: phony travel stamps intended to cover up their travel to Afghanistan to attend terror training camps.
Even though there'd been the bombings in 95, 96, 98, 2000, all involving Saudis, no one asked for a national intelligence estimate if Saudi Arabia is a new terrorist state.
In April of 2000, Nayaz Khan, a British citizen originally from Pakistan, was recruited by al-Qaeda.
It was over a year before 9/11, a Pakistani-British man told the FBI an incredible tale, that he'd been trained by followers of Osama bin Laden to hijack airplanes, and he confessed he was now in America to carry out an attack.
After gambling away money sent to him for flight training, and afraid al-Qaeda would come after him for betrayal, he turned himself into the FBI. He detailed the plot to fly a hijacked plane into the World Trade Center, in which he was a part. This was April of 2000. A member of the attacks turned himself in and confessed to the attacks. He also disclosed that other agents were inside the United States.
Khan tells NBC News that for the next few weeks, he was trained by al-Qaeda to hijack passenger planes and sent to the U.S. But when he told the FBI, headquarters was skeptical and ordered him released.
I told him before the 9/11, about more than a year, we hijacking in America Airlines.
Khan says he was sent to Lahore, Pakistan, and along with perhaps 30 others, taught hijacking basics. Did you think about all the other people you would have killed?
No.
You didn't care?
Not that time. If I die, it doesn't matter. Because this life anyway, it's no good.
After about a week, Khan says he was given money to fly from Pakistan to Doha, Qatar, London, Zurich, back to London, then to New York, observing flight operations. Upon landing at JFK Airport, Khan says he was supposed to go to this taxi stand, find a man in a white prayer cap, and use a code. Khan claims he got cold feet. Instead of meeting his contact, he slipped away, gambled away all his money, and in fear turned himself in and confessed.
I've been to Pakistan. I know about this hijacking, something going on.
For 3 weeks, the FBI in Newark interrogated Khan, created composite drawings of his terrorist trainer and a fellow student. NBC News has learned Khan passed not 1, but 2 polygraphs. A former FBI official says Newark agents believed him, but word came from headquarters, quote, return him to London and forget about it.
Another man, Randy Glass, claimed he knew of the coming attacks. Glass was an undercover operative trusted by the U.S. working for the FBI as an informant.
Dateline obtained dozens of tapes of a government informant talking with people about arming terrorists, including this New Jersey man named Dia Moishan.
I'll take you to the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan.
The talk is deadly serious.
I'll kill him. I'll kill you.
And there's no attempt to conceal who might ultimately receive the weapons.
He is very connected to the Taliban. You know who supplies him with money? Who? Osama bin Laden.
The conversations were recorded by Randy Glass, a con man in trouble with the law who offered to go undercover and pose as a weapons dealer.
The cover story was that I had people that were stealing these military weapons.
From the U.S. military?
Correct, from the U.S. military.
The investigation, which ran from 1998 to June 2001, was orchestrated by agents from the Florida offices of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI. Randy Glass's undercover work eventually led to a dinner meeting in New York with a mysterious man from Pakistan named R.G. Abbas, who Glass says made no attempt to hide his feelings for Americans.
And he told me that Americans were the enemy. And he looked around the restaurant and he said, we would have no problem with blowing up this entire restaurant.
We would have no problem blowing up this entire restaurant.
Because it's full of Americans.
And Glass says Abbas's people wanted to buy all sorts of weapons, even components for a nuclear weapon.
They inquired if it was available.
And you said?
Yes.
And they responded?
They were interested.
Today, in a phone conversation with Dateline, Abbas denied trying to buy weapons. But Dick Stoltz, one of the federal agents who worked on the case, said the people he was dealing with meant business.
You had to realize that the people being talked about as customers for these weapons were the most wanted terrorists in the world. That's correct. Bin Laden? Correct. Did you think they were serious? Oh, absolutely.
Glass recorded his meetings, and on July 22, 1999, he wiretapped a meeting at the Tribeca Grill with an arms buyer, Raja Ghulam Abbas.
During the course of the conversation, I asked him exactly what his intentions were. After dinner, as we walked outside, he pointed in the direction of the World Trade Center and said, "Those towers are coming down."
Randy Glass became so concerned about what he was learning during his work as an informant that he wrote a letter to Senator Bob Graham.
Francis X. Taylor told Randy Glass, "We know all about planes being flown into the World Trade Center." Randy Glass hadn't mentioned planes. He had mentioned a threat that he knew about from these Pakistani spies who were trying to buy arms on the international market. So Randy Glass really starts freaking out. He starts faxing Senator Bob Graham and other people this information. And you can see this in my book. Let me grab a copy here. This is something I put in the book on the inside back cover in orange is a facsimile of the actual fax that Randy Glass was trying to fax at that time. And it's a pretty amazing document. You know, he said something like, "I know I'm way in over my head here, but this thread that I know about, the thing that the State Department said about planes being used, you know, even the agents I'm working with are really concerned, and please have somebody call me."
On file and dated July 16, 2001, 2 months before 9/11, Glass writes to Graham, "Please tell me what is going on. I've told you repeatedly about my terrorist case, the sophisticated weapon system, nuclear components, the targets of blowing up the World Trade Center, and who knows what else. These people hate Americans. This information I've gotten from the State Department about the airplanes being used."
I had been threatened by FBI agent Steve Brodowski that if I mentioned any of that, I would be charged with obstruction of justice.
Abbas turned out to be a Pakistani ISI agent. Yet again, another intelligence asset connected to Al-Qaeda. Senator Bob Graham stated he was surprised to see foreign governments involved in the attacks.
But also I was surprised at the evidence that there were foreign governments involved in facilitating the activities of at least some of the terrorists in the United States. I am stunned that we have not done a better job of pursuing that to determine if other terrorists received similar support, and even more important, if the infrastructure of a foreign government assisting terrorists still exists for the current generation of terrorists who are here planning the next plots. To me, that is an extremely significant issue, and most of that information is classified, I think overly classified. I believe the American people should know the extent of the challenge that we face in terms of foreign government involvement, and that would motivate the government to take action.
Are you suggesting that you are convinced that there was a state sponsor behind 9/11?
I think there is very compelling evidence that at least some of the terrorists were assisted, not just in financing, although that was part of it, by a sovereign foreign government, and that we have been derelict in our duty to track that down, make the further case, or find evidence that would indicate that that is not true, and we can look for other reasons why the terrorists were able to function so effectively in the United States.
And do you think that will ever become public? Which countries are talking about?
It'll become public at some point when it's turned over to the archives, but that's 20 or 30 years from now. We need to have this information now because it's relevant to the threat that the people of the United States are facing today.
But the 9/11 Commission maintained that no foreign governments were involved in the attacks. What is the Pakistani connection, and why doesn't the public know more about it? Why does Bob Graham act so surprised when he was warned by both Dr. David Graham and Randy Glass about Pakistan's operational involvement in 9/11? Now remember, Porter Goss was also warned by Dr. David Graham. Is it just a coincidence that these were the only two men that were warned and also happened to be conveniently sitting aboard the congressional inquiry that investigated 9/11 that gave the public the official story? They sat in command of the congressional inquiry with Nancy Pelosi.
It took us 9 months to do all of our work, have our hearings, interview our witnesses, write the report, and it took 6 months for the administration to agree to some level of declassification. The report is overclassified. That is a disservice to the American people.
There are just pages of blank here that the committee's left out.
A number of September 11th families are angry at the U.S. government, and information withheld from the report on Congress's investigation of the attacks is just the starting point.
The cover-up. William Doyle lost his oldest son, 25-year-old Joseph, a traitor for Cantor Fitzgerald.
Nothing.
Doyle says all these empty pages are about the role of Saudi Arabia. The White House, which took 7 months to screen the document for sensitive material, deleted the information, he says, because the government wants to keep Saudi Arabia's support for the terrorists secret.
There's so many oil dealings and what have you, and I honestly believe that they do not want that to come out in the wash.
After reading the report, Doyle says that the INS is to blame too, that the hijackers never should have been allowed to stay in the country. He tempers his anger, reflecting by a shrine for his son. 2 years after the fact, the report doesn't seem to offer closure. Instead, a new opening and a very raw wound.
The much-anticipated report was more than 800 pages long. But since it was released this past summer, most of the attention has focused on 28 of those pages. One chapter that is almost completely redacted, ordered classified by the White House, and blacked out to the public.
And because they're classified, I can't tell you what's in those pages. I can tell you that the chapter deals with information that our committees found in FBI and CIA files that was very disturbing. It had to do with sources of foreign support for the hijackers, or alleged sources of foreign support for the hijackers.
Now, I know it is believed and has been reported that many of those 27 or 28 redacted pages deal with the Saudi relationship to the hijackers, but...
That's what the press has said. I haven't said that.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
By then, the Bush administration knew that despite years of Saudi reassurance, 15 of the 19 hijackers had been Saudi nationals. So in the terrible aftermath of September 11, surely it was now time to track down those who provided money and support for 9/11 wherever they might be. Right? Wrong again, according to former CIA insider Robert Baer.
When George W. Bush says, terrorists, those who harbor them, those who give support to them, are our enemies.
That's obviously not true, because
Everybody that financed September 11th is currently in Saudi Arabia and free. I mean, it was sort of like if bin Laden had said, well, you know, it's just a coincidence my guys happened to run into your towers. Are we just going to leave him alone?
Not all the money that financed the attacks came from Saudi Arabia, although the majority of it did. Not surprisingly, another source of the funding came from Pakistan. It was reported in the Times of India that a $100,000 wire transfer took place between Omar Sheikh, an ISI agent, and Muhammad Atta, ringleader of the 9/11 attacks. Omar Sheikh was ordered through the ISI to transfer the funds by the ISI chief, General Mahmoud Ahmed. Was this detected by the United States? Well, Senior Vice President of Anti-Money Laundering at Corporate Risk International, Dennis Ormel, was responsible for anti-money laundering and terrorist financing services. Dennis retired from the FBI following 28 years of service as a special agent. Yes, right out on the front end, they wired over $100,000 in to Mr. Atta a year ago, and we are aware of that. And we tracked that back to accounts in the United Arab Emirates. Deputy Director of the FBI, John Pistole, stated that the FBI conducted a detailed financial investigation analysis of the 19 hijackers and their support network following the September 11th attacks. A continuing investigation, in coordination with the Pent Bomb team, has traced the origin of the funding of 9/11 back to the financial accounts in Pakistan.
Suspected hijacker Mohammed Atta received wire transfers via Pakistan and then distributed the cash via money orders bought here in Florida. A senior law enforcement source tells CNN the man sending the money to Atta is believed to be Ahmed Umar Saeed Sheikh.
He reportedly is controlling certain aspects of the financial transactions of the Al-Qaeda network.
Once a standout student at the London School of Economics, the British-born son of Pakistani parents speaks 5 languages.
Ahmad Omar Saeed Sheikh, the ISI agent who wired the money to Muhammad Atta, had many aliases, but he became widely known for being accused of kidnapping and beheading Wall Street journalist Daniel Pearl. The chief of the ISI who ordered the wire transfer to Muhammad Atta, General Mahmoud Ahmed, was actually visiting Washington the week of 9/11, arriving exactly 1 week before September 11th. The general met with Pentagon, White House, National Security Council, and CIA officials.
Are you aware of the reports at the time that ISI chief was in Washington on September 11 and on September 10th, $100,000 was wired from Pakistan to these groups here in this area? And why he was here, was meeting with you or anybody in the administration?
I have not seen that report, and he was certainly not meeting with me. Yes?
As for Omar Saeed Sheikh, he was found to be Pakistani ISI, the CIA's counterpart in Pakistan.
Testing officer A.K. Jain says, under questioning, Omar Sheikh admitted he was supported by the Pakistan government's intelligence service, the ISI.
He had told me that.
He admitted to you?
Oh, yes.
And after his release, it was very clear that he was provided protection and safe haven in Pakistan with the direct support, with the knowledge, and obviously with the connivance of the Pakistani intelligence.
On the very morning of 9/11, General Mahmoud Ahmed, one of the financiers of the attacks, was at a breakfast meeting on Capitol Hill, hosted by, guess who? Senator Bob Graham and Representative Porter Goss, the chairman of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Now remember, Senator Bob Graham and Representative Porter Goss, who were warned by Dr. David Graham and FBI informant Randy Glass about the very clear Saudi and Pakistani involvement, and these two men are hosting a meeting with one of the financiers of the attack, Pakistani ISI chief, on the morning of the attacks, watching them take place together. And it was these two men that would later head the congressional inquiry with Nancy Pelosi that gave the public the official story of 9/11, and conveniently left the information out about these foreign governments. 2 days after the attacks on the Twin Towers in the Pentagon, on September 13th, Joseph Biden, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at the time, and current vice president, also met with the ISI chief. When asked about the ISI funding of 9/11 and the Taliban, he stated that it was classified.
How did you know the ISI was helping the Taliban, sir? How did you know they were helping them? This is a Pakistani ISI, General Muhammad Ahmed. It has since come to light that he ordered Saeed Sheikh to wire $100,000 to Muhammad Atta. Why was he allowed to go back to Pakistan, and why wasn't he questioned, and why were you meeting with him?
I met with him to deliver a message that if he didn't stop supporting the Taliban, we would take him out.
What is the importance of covering up Pakistan's role? Perhaps one should look back at 1979. The Pakistani ISI is the CIA's counterpart in Pakistan and was the CIA cutout which created, communicated, and financed the Mujahideen during the U.S. covert war with the Soviets in Afghanistan. Dan Rather of CBS News, Bin Laden was in a military hospital in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, one day before the 9/11 attacks, on September 10th.
CBS News has been told that the night before the September 11th terrorist attack, Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan. He was getting medical treatment with the support of the very military that days later pledged its backing for the U.S. war on terror in Afghanistan. Pakistan intelligence sources tell CBS News that bin Laden was spirited into this military hospital in Rawalpindi for kidney dialysis treatment. On that night, says this medical worker who wanted her identity protected, they moved out all the regular staff in the urology department and sent in a secret team to replace them. She says it was treatment for a very special person. The special team was obviously up to no good. The military had him surrounded, says this hospital employee who also wanted his identity masked. And I saw the mysterious patient helped out of a car. Since that time, he says, I have seen many pictures of the man. He is the man we know as Osama bin Laden. I also heard two Army officers talking to each other. They were saying that Osama bin Laden had to be watched carefully and looked after.
Interestingly, ironically, whatever you want to call it, the World Trade Center just hired 2 weeks ago the head of the FBI's National Security Division for Counterterrorism in New York to augment and take over their security.
It is our greatest resource. We talk about all of the high-tech things that the FBI has, all the tools in our arsenal, and the greatest tool that we have is our employees, the men and women that come in and day out and work long, hard hours to accomplish their missions and their tasks, and to do it under the rule of law, to do it every single day, to protect people's constitutional rights, their civil rights, but at the same time protect them from all the bad things that are out there.
On August 22, 2001, FBI agent John O'Neill resigned from the Bureau, citing repeated obstruction of his investigations into al-Qaeda. Former FBI Deputy Director John O'Neill wanted to investigate the terrorists who were planning to blow up the trade towers on 9/11, but he was prevented from doing so by President George Bush. Bush signed Presidential Directive W199I, making it a crime to investigate or hinder the operations of one Abdullah bin Laden in any way.
Bush had put limits on investigations by our intelligence agencies on investigating the money behind the terrorists before September 11th, because Saudi Arabia is the source of almost all the funding, and you could not touch the guys that were giving the money to make al-Qaeda operate. Now, a lot of this, we believe, was determined in a meeting in Paris in 1996. The Khobar Towers were attacked within Saudi Arabia. 19 American military people were killed while they were sleeping. That was al-Qaeda. Rather than go after these guys and capture them, basically went to them and said, how much does it cost for you to go play in Afghanistan instead, or in Uzbekistan? And by the way, it's not just paying them protection money to get lost. They actually wanted al-Qaeda to spread the word of Wahhabism and sell to Central Asian republics the kind of vicious, small-minded, feudal state that they have in Saudi Arabia. Of course, al-Qaeda's vision was that it's not feudal enough and it's not terrible enough. I even have the documents from the FBI, secret documents that were dropped off by FBI agents.
This document is marked secret and WF, which means it walked its way out of the Washington Bureau of the FBI. It indicates that before the attack of September 11th, agents had wanted to question two members of a very powerful family for their connections to a suspected terrorist organization, Omar and Abdullah bin Laden. But the agents weren't allowed to. Now, what makes this family so special that they're protected from investigation?
This followed previous orders to abandon an investigation of bin Laden relatives in 1996 by Bill Clinton, and difficulties in investigating Saudi royalty. President Clinton was already hindering investigations by protecting Saudi interests during the 1990s. His approach to terror was weak. However, where Clinton said go slow, Bush policymakers said no go. The difference is between closing one eye and closing them both. No one would be allowed to pursue certain Saudis and Pakistanis, many of which were involved in the September 11th attacks. In Washington, politicians jumped to the claim that anyone harboring or supporting terrorists should be pursued. But when it comes to some powerful individuals in these two countries, a blind eye is turned. The issue rarely raised by reporters. Disgusted and angry at both the Bush and Clinton administrations, FBI agent John O'Neill ended his career by resigning office. John O'Neill was given a new career as Deputy of Security at the World Trade Center in New York City for the private security team of the leaseholder of the building, Larry Silverstein.
Did you recruit John O'Neill into Kroll? No. Who did?
He didn't work for Kroll.
Who did he work for?
He worked for the FBI and then went to work for Larry Silverstein.
But I thought Kroll had the contract to do security at the World Trade Center, and I thought John O'Neill's first day at the job was on 9/11.
And I joked with him. I said, well, that'll be an easy job. They're not going to bomb that place again. And he said, well, actually, he immediately came back and he said, no, actually, they've always wanted to finish that job. I think they're going to try again.
Silverstein had his own security company? How did this work?
No, Silverstein had his own people that worked on security. He had a whole security staff there.
Okay.
On the night of September 10th, John O'Neill did what he loved doing, and he did it from his favorite table at Elaine's.
We left about 2:30. John gave me a big bear hug and said, I'll see you tomorrow. And John went home, and that was the last I saw him.
Little did John O'Neill know that his first day on the job would also be the last day of his life on Earth. This seemed very convenient for Osama bin Laden because the one individual who stands tall among those intelligence and law enforcement officers who were aggressively pursuing the criminal network that would carry out 9/11 was counterterrorism top man John O'Neill. Ever since the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, O'Neill's pursuit of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda had been hindered, as the biography of his book detailed. After further terrorist attacks at the Khobar Towers barracks in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and the USS Cole in Aden Harbor, O'Neill's biggest problem was not Al-Qaeda. It was resistance from top officials inside the United States government.
John O'Neill was the chief investigator of the USS Cole bombing.
On October 12, 2000, the USS Cole was reportedly blown up by two men who approached the warship in a small boat. It was recently reported that the suspects involved in the USS Cole bombing have escaped Yemeni prisons by tunneling their way out.
During the trial where a Yemeni court convicted him of murdering 17 American sailors, Jamal al-Badawi showed no remorse, only defiance. Sentenced to death for his role in the bombing of the USS Cole, al-Badawi's sentence was later reduced to 15 years in prison. Now, barely 15 months into that sentence at a prison outside Yemen's capital, Sana'a, he and 22 other prisoners, including at least 13 convicted al-Qaeda terrorists, have escaped through a 150-yard tunnel dug under the prison wall. Today, Interpol issued a global security alert calling al-Badawi and the other escapees a clear and present danger to all countries.
In his pursuit of al-Qaeda, O'Neill, according to people who worked closely with him, began to have serious concerns over complicity by those inside the Clinton and Bush administrations. There was the mysterious theft in the summer of 2000 of his briefcase at a Tampa hotel during a retirement seminar where the only participants were 150 other FBI agents.
O'Neill attended a conference of other agents in Florida.
We were meeting in Bal Harbor at the Marriott. John came in. He is just, I don't remember seeing John as distraught as he was this night. What has happened, he told me, he left his briefcase in this room of 150 FBI agents and got a phone call. Couldn't hear on his cell phone, so he just walked outside to take his call. Walked back in, his briefcase was gone. He was completely freaked.
O'Neill's bag contained classified documents.
In the briefcase were a few classified emails and a classified document called the Annual Field Office Report, a summary of the New York FBI's Office Counterterrorist and Counterintelligence Operations, including one very sensitive investigation being conducted by another New York counterintelligence FBI special agent, Michael Dick. After the incident, whoever stole O'Neill's briefcase had found out what O'Neill knew about both al-Qaeda and their Israeli shadows. John O'Neill's FBI colleague, Mike Dick, aggressively investigated the Israeli ring before and after 9/11. Like O'Neill, he soon found himself removed from his duties on the orders of the then head of the Justice Department's Criminal Division, Michael Chertoff. Dick was very suspicious when Israeli movers quickly moved Zim American Israeli Shipping Company out of its 10,000 square foot office on the 17th floor of the North Tower. The partially Israeli state-owned firm fortified a $50,000 security deposit when it terminated its lease and vacated the building 1 week prior to 9/11. Could there have been communications of the coming attacks with the Israeli spy ring? These are questions which the 9/11 Commission never sought answers to. Evidence that other Israelis had been forewarned several hours before the attacks surfaced on an Israeli instant messaging service known as Odago. At least 2 Israeli-based employees of Odago received warnings of an imminent attack in New York City, more than 2 hours before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. Odago had its U.S. headquarters 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. The Odago employees, however, did not pass the warning on to the authorities in New York City.
In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Here's how wiretapping works in the U.S. Every time you make a call, it passes through the nation's elaborate network of switchers and routers run by the phone companies. Custom computers and software made by companies like Comverse are tied into that network to intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls, and at the same time transmit them to investigators. The manufacturers have continuing access to the computers so they can service them and keep them free of glitches. But the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Comverse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. It is the FBI's office in Quantico, Virginia that has jurisdiction over awarding contracts and buying intercept equipment. And for years they've thrown much of the business to Comverse. A handful of former U.S. law enforcement officials involved in awarding Comverse government contracts over the years now work for the company. Numerous sources say some of those individuals were asked to leave government service under what knowledgeable sources call troublesome circumstances that remain under administrative review within the Justice Department. And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett?
Carl, is there any reason to suspect in this instance that the Israeli government is involved?
There are growing instincts in an awful lot of law enforcement officials in a variety of agencies who suspect that and have begun compiling evidence and a highly classified investigation into precisely that possibility.
James Bamford, the famous investigative reporter who declassified Operation Northwoods, the top-secret military plan to attack the United States with false flag terror to influence a war with Cuba in the early 1960s, recently released a new book detailing that Israel's booming high-tech industry is a branch of the Mossad.
After 9/11, many Israelis were rounded up in a spy ring that was discovered.
Some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. Investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity.
The art students were also shadowing the very same Arab cells that would later carry out the 9/11 attacks.
Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally.
On March 22nd and 27th in 2002, DEA agents arrested 5 Israelis in the Oak Hills apartment complex in Irving, Texas. A $10,000 bond for Michael Gall was placed by Ophir Bayer, an employee of the Israeli telecommunications firm Amdocs, a firm with operational access to the telephones being used by FBI agents John O'Neill, Michael Dick, and the DEA agents involved in tracking the Saudi mafia drug shipments being used to support various terror cells in the United States and abroad.
We learn about an Israeli-based private communications company for whom a half dozen of those 60 detained suspects worked.
Fox News has learned that some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. How? By obtaining and analyzing data that's generated every time someone in the U.S. makes a phone call.
What city and state, please?
Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company. Amdocs has contracts with the 25 biggest phone companies in America and more worldwide. It is virtually impossible to make a call on normal phones without generating an Amdocs record of it. In 1999, the super-secret National Security Agency, headquartered in Northern Maryland, issued what's called a top-secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information report, TSSCI, warning that records of calls in the United States were getting into foreign hands, in Israel in particular. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and The other aspects of your question, whether it's because they're in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Special Agent Dick, who worked closely with O'Neill, had discovered a troubling ring of Israeli movers operating in New York and New Jersey, many of whom had past connections to Israeli intelligence and military demolition units.
The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and/or explosive ordnance units.
Dominic Suter was the head of Urban Moving Systems. This appears to be the base of operations for 2 white vans with the same rear license plates that were seen parked in the Doric Apartments near Patterson Plank Road and at Liberty State Park at the same time the first plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Few Americans know the story of the Israelis caught filming the World Trade Center before the first plane struck. CIA agent Robert Baer stated that it was confirmed that the Israelis were filming the World Trade Center before the first plane struck.
Someone mentioned in there that you had said something real quickly about someone should write a book about the white van. What did you mean by that?
Well, there was an incident where there was a white van in New Jersey across from the World Trade Center, and 5 Israelis, probably Mossad, were giving the high five after the World Trade Center was hit. The investigation was taken away at the Justice Department from terrorism and put in national security, completely sealed off. You know, if you can look at it benignly, it was the Israelis stumbled across this, didn't believe it, or worse. I just don't know, but the parameters of people knew about this of 9/11 in advance are there, and they need to be investigated.
Is it possible that these Mossad assets were in place in New Jersey in order to film the first hit? And there's actually a lot of reports that they were there set up before the first plane hit.
They were set up before the first plane
hit. So you can confirm that. That's true.
Yeah, they were set up there before.
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
After the collisions, the Israelis were seen dancing, and police were called to the scene for suspicions of involvement in the attacks. The Israelis were seen jumping and cheering, taking pictures of themselves in front of the burning towers.
I had my binoculars, and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van park. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
Amazingly enough, we have found the moving company where the 5 Israelis worked.
Was this building being used as a front for some kind of Israeli intelligence operation that possibly was doing surveillance on the Arab American community? Were there men celebrating or slapping 5s or whatever?
Some of the guys were kind of happy that, they were smiling. It wasn't like something, out of terror. And I think some of the people saw them up on the roof from that building over there and reported them to the police.
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van and, hollered over to my lieutenant, I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
The Israelis were, for a moment, in the gossip spotlight in Israel, and were invited on an Israeli talk show.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
The 5 Israelis were detained for 10 weeks and finally deported on immigration violations after the FBI cleared them of any involvement in 9/11.
The details of the Israelis who worked for the moving company were not well reported to the rest of the country, and little known is the stories of the vans which were stopped with explosives found in them, as well as vans which were reportedly blown up. Reports of vans packed with explosives were confirmed at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001.
Alluded to a report that there had been a van loaded with some explosives stopped near the George Washington Bridge.
About earlier, we had heard that an FBI spokesperson said that there was a report on the George Washington Bridge, which is another facility which you folks are responsible for policing, a report that there had been a van stopped there that had explosives.
2 or 3 men arrested on the New Jersey Parkway. Deborah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. That is the information that I'm getting from 2 sources, that there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
Now, WCBS-TV News in New York is reporting 2 people arrested by the FBI in a truck with explosives under the George Washington Bridge. The DW Bridge spans the Hudson River connecting New York City and New Jersey.
Do you know anything about those extra explosions we heard?
No, I do not.
Were they car bombs?
I have no idea, ma'am.
Are you being told that we're going to have to move out of this area as well?
I was not told anything relative to that.
What about the sewers? Are they looking for bombs in sewers?
All non-essential personnel. That's all I can tell you.
Okay, obviously.
Mayor Rudy Giuliani now speaking again.
Hopeful that we'll be able to rescue some more people. I have no idea how many others, but at least there's some hope that we'll be able to get some people out. We have been able to get 2 people out who have been identified as Port Authority police officers.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives has anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects and they're questioning them as we speak.
It was this evidence that caused the agency to speculate that a van packed with explosives was parked in the garage, which was also detonated to help weaken the structure.
About a block and a half away from the site of where the explosion was. That area has just been evacuated because police have found what they describe as a suspicious device, and they fear that it might be something that could lead to another explosion. Obviously, there's a real sense of caution here on the part of police. I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it.
Joining me is Jack Kelly. Now, he is a foreign correspondent, war correspondent, and just came back from Israel. He has some information about these attacks. Jack, what can you tell us happened first in New York?
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time 2 planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point.
I've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
In the police radio recordings released to the public, reports of vans were confirmed.
Good evening. The tapes offer a chilling record of terror and heroism.
There were many calls like these.
United City Police 385. We have a white van. Three guys in there. They look like countless civilians going around the building. There's a minivan heading towards the Howard Tunnel. I see the guy by Newark Airport mixing some drugs, and he has no street uniform on. He has what? He's dressed like an Arab.
One officer reports a van actually exploding and his needing assistance.
We have both suspects under K. We have the suspects who drove in the van exploded. We have both of them under K. Let's get some help over here.
Now, I'm sending you here, shoot that. I just want to make sure you and your guys are all right over there, K. That's all.
What's the location, right, K? Put them up, put them up. You know, we have both Trans driven that exploded. Resurrect?
Hillary, I gotta go.
They're pulling him away. Let me tell you what's happening. They're pulling him away. They're taking away Lieutenant Sam Esposito. They just was an off-duty officer just now.
Ladies,
a paper block away, came running out of the office when he saw what was happening, and has told us a very compelling story. We were trying to get him on tape. He really should not have been out of the hospital, but said he actually needed a cup of coffee, and that's why he walked out. But his story was that he ran in. He went into the daycare center, which really hasn't been mentioned very much, on the second floor of one of the World Trade Center buildings. And the good news, he said, was there was nobody in that center, but he made his way up. He pulled people out with him as they resisted, and then there was an explosion. He said car exploding outside, knocked him unconscious, and he was rescued himself by a firefighter.
We're obviously having a bit of trouble right now maintaining our location because we just heard one more explosion. That's about the fourth one we've heard. The police are telling us they're either car bombs.
Another radio communication confirms that a van was pulled over for having a mural on the side of it, depicting a plane flying into the World Trade Center. A remote-controlled one.
One of those remote-controlled planes filled with explosives. And find the message of the plane. Be advised, I'm through. I'm not film, Central. Negative. Get an updated plane. Central, I got a message on that plane. It's a big truck with a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. All right, Central, I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there for Westgate. The bird? That's fine. With a mural painted, airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under.
Reference to the mural van was also made in the February 2006 Norman Mineta report. The report was titled, Saving City Lifelines, Lessons Learned from the 9/11 Attacks. The report stated, there were continuing moments of alarm. A panel truck with a painting of a plane flying into the World Trade Center was stopped near the temporary command post. It proved to be rented to a group of ethnic Middle Eastern people who did not speak English. Fearing that it might be a truck bomb, the New York City Police Department immediately evacuated the area, called out the bomb squad, and detained the occupants until a thorough search was made. This might just be the oddest story of 9/11 that is credibly reported. Why are there so many reports of explosives or explosive devices found on 9/11, as well as sub-level explosions, among many other?
Kim White was stuck on the 74th floor of Tower 1.
The doors were locked.
Why?
I have no clue. We sat around for about 5, almost 10 minutes trying to find a door or get somebody with a key.
On 9/11, I had the only master key that opened the doors that rescue people. This is the master key. They call it the key of hope. And basically, I was a janitor. Like I said, on that day, there was an explosion on the basement. And this is prior to the building got hit by the plane. And then the plane hit, and then there was a series of explosions afterwards. And a person comes running into the office saying, explosion, explosion, explosion.
The ladies that are with me were in the World Trade Center in the first building and escaped through the lobby where they report they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
Our office was on the B1 level. As I was talking to a supervisor at 8:46, and all of a sudden we hear, boom! An explosion so hard that pushed us upwards. And it came from the basement between the B2 level and the B3 level. And when I went to verbalize, we hear, boom! The impact of the plane on the top.
And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in.
Right away, a guy from the Port Authority told him the damage was somewhere above the 78th floor. But all you had to do was look around. It was obvious. Something had happened right there in the lobby.
You just saw that all the windows
were blown out. The lobby looked like the plane hit the lobby.
And a fireball emerged from the elevator lobby and was coming toward me.
Out on the elevator, the glass just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
I asked him what happened. What was amazing about his story was that he was in the lobby of World Trade Center 1 when the first plane hit. And when the debris started coming down, he went back to go into the building to protect himself and was in the revolving doors going back in off West Street when he looked up and a fireball came flying out, I guess from the elevator shafts, that's what he seemed to believe, and blew out all the windows and threw him back onto the street.
6th floor, and I was reviewing some work, and it was about 10 to 9, and the building shook. And I felt it was an earthquake, and it didn't bother me because I felt the building could sustain earthquakes. They were built for that. And then there was a huge explosion, and the ceiling fell.
He went through the front door of the ground floor, and the lady who was about 3 seconds in front of him was hit by a terrific fireball, and she was horrifically injured. So we went to her assistance. I think he got some sort of tablecloth to put over her. As he was doing that, another explosion happened.
I was in the B4 level. I was assigned to the B3 level, but I had to do something in the B4 sheet metal shop. So I went in the sheet metal shop, do what I had to do, and on my way, I heard a bomb. So I says, probably the transformer again blew up. So I stepped back, finished what I had to finish, and I started towards the door again. And there come a big blast with a big ball of fire. And that's when I got hit. It hit me right back down on the ground, and I realized that my ankle was shattered.
We then were talking about the day's work and what needed to be done when we heard a massive explosion that was in the World Trade Center at about 8:46 a.m. in the morning. The explosion came from, I believe, at first we believed that it came from the mechanical room. And then we heard a series of other explosions that sounded up on the above levels of the building, to where we then realized that there was something wrong and there was a major problem.
What happened was I was down in the basement. All of a sudden we heard a loud bang.
We ran down the steps to the lobby. There was no lobby. Everything was torn up, and even the turnstile was burnt and was sticking up, and they just told us to run. My boss ran out of the office. He said one thing, run. Everybody just ran, and we ran down the stairs. They told us to come back up the stairs, and we were like, come back up the stairs, are you crazy? So we continued down the stairs. We came outside in the lobby. There was no lobby. The lobby was totally gone.
Did you see other people?
People. There was a woman there with her face blown off.
I just thought something, because I know that the loading dock is on B1, that's 3 floors above me. I just assumed that a car or something exploded on B1, or something got delivered and something big and heavy fell over. You just knew it was something big, because, you know, I can't even imagine living in San Francisco or earthquakes, but when the floor is moving underneath you and everything is just happening and smoke, and as I ran into the parking lots, you know, I mean, everybody's screaming. I actually helped somebody get to a staircase that had a broken leg. There was a lot of smoke down there. There was a lot of people screaming. People came with us running up the ramps. We wanted to get help for the people that couldn't move down there. I mean, I know of people that got killed in the basement. I know of people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face. And I know, We have someone in the area who's seen some of this happen. George Shea is on the telephone. George, tell me what your vantage point is and what do you know about this place?
I'm on West Street, right out of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and I was driving in, and I heard an enormous explosion. Then I heard another enormous explosion.
That I don't doubt that the planes were there. The plane hit the building, but before, and one of the experiences that I said even when I was pulled from the rubble on 9/11 is that there was an initial explosion on the sub-level number 2, B2. There were 6 sub-levels in the building. before, prior to the plane hitting the building. And I believe that that was an explosion set up by explosive to actually weaken the foundation.
And nothing will ever change your mind that? You think
I was there, I saved people, I actually have the people available for the 9/11 Commission. That was the commission that was created to investigate this. They were never called, not even once. They're still available 5 years after, and the government came out with an official story that went against our experience on that day.
So the building's on fire, and I'm noticing there's no police yet. There's no fire trucks, and it's been a couple minutes, and I'm not sure that they seem like really long minutes. So as I'm in traffic, and the traffic is kind of creeping up, and people are driving away, and people are getting out of their cars, I got to a point where I can't go forward anymore, so I had to make a left turn. Some people were turning around, but I was concerned because at that point, it wasn't a terrorist attack. It's a tragic accident. My friends are up there, people I work with, so I was just going with the flow, I guess, at that point. And I was between World Trade Center 7 and World Trade Center 6 on Vesey Street. And when the South Tower event happens, it happened from my blind side because I was on the north side of the South Tower. So what you see from my side is a big orange explosion and debris, fire and debris raining down, and I've got the top down. And at the same time that it's registering that that's not an accident from that, I see flashes going off in World Trade Center 6, which was, as you come to learn later, the U.S. Customs House and the Department of Labor, and that there's a big crater that goes through that all the way down into the subway. So anyway, that's Building 6.
Jamie Gangel, I just want to say that some of the descriptions coming from eyewitnesses in lower Manhattan of these explosions occurring are chilling. One man talked about getting off a PATH train, that's a subway train.
Just get out of the tunnel in the blue.
The subway tunnel?
Yeah.
These twin sisters, visiting from Alabama and Georgia, met in New York to share their 40th birthday. They were having coffee in the World Trade Center when the first plane struck.
And all of a sudden it sounded like, I don't know where the subway is, but it sounded like a subway collision, a bomb. And it was just pounding, boom, boom, boom. And I literally thought the subway had exploded. And
did you see what happened? What happened?
Well, I was in the PATH train, and there was a huge explosion sound. Everyone came out.
Tell us what you saw when you exited the subway station due to a lack of smoke. Eileen.
It was very smoky, and then we exited on Church Street out of the PATH train station.
At the time, I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Peter?
Yes, Dan.
Reports that devices were found did make it to the airwaves on 9/11, and some original footage confirmed what many investigations uncovered, that some firemen began to pack up and leave just before the towers collapsed because of suspicious devices being found.
Anything else you know that you'd like to add?
Just as I was coming out of the building, I heard somebody sort of ushering people away, and they were saying, you guys got to get out of here, it's a bomb.
Many thanks, Lindsey Grimm, who saw this occurring at least.
It was a bomb. Bomb in another building. That was a bomb.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat, moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. Chief Albert Turry told me that he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
Bomb in the building, start clearing out. Sorry, you said it's a bomb? What'd you say? Bomb in the building, start clearing out. Got it.
First one and then the other, some say after secondary explosions.
And there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
His comrade was a firefighter, was trapped about 500 feet in under some debris down West Street, and he turned around and said he saw a police officer walking with him carrying a 9mm pistol, and he asked him what he was doing, and he said that there were people in the area that were planting bombs after the planes had flown into the tower, that the bombs apparently, and this is just going on what one firefighter told me, police believe that there were bombers that were in the area after the planes hit the towers planting bombs, and that may have been what caused the further devastation. Are you still with me?
Yes, we're listening to you, Joe. It's just unbelievable what you're telling us.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
In fact, Rudy Giuliani received this warning, which is why they started to pack up and leave the area, moving their command post.
And several of them that I talked to 10 minutes, 12 minutes before they died. I was at the command post that the fire department had, and left them to go to the command post that we were establishing.
Did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management?
I went down to the scene, and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse.
Coming over our radio, get out of the area, the second tower is coming down.
They tell you the second tower is coming down?
Yes, it's about to collapse.
Mayor Rudolph Giuliani walked right past me here on Church Street and Duane Street, again about 4 blocks from that area, moving his entourage out of that region, and then just moments later was when the collapse happened.
So people should remain calm, they should remain where they are, except if they are in southern Manhattan. If you're below Canal Street, you should walk out of southern Manhattan and walk north.
Then there was all the eyewitness testimony talking about the secondary explosions.
I mean, you had it on 9/11. There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
When we got down to 6th floor, there was like another shake or another explosion. Everyone started panicking, but
there was another big explosion in the other tower. Flames coming out in this billowing grey smoke. People still not panicking. People not quite understanding what was going on. Then somebody said that they saw an airliner going to one of those towers. Then, I don't know, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
We heard another explosion, and I'm assuming that's the one that came from the lower level, since there were 2. And I said,
right, because it was like 18 minutes apart.
Well, this is the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were 2 explosions.
Okay.
But then there were other doors that were locked, so we were brought into another floor when there was another explosion, and they finally let us continue to go down.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandeliers shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
3 large explosions were described right before and during the time the towers came down.
4 towers. At that time, maybe 45 minutes into the taping that we were doing, which was maybe a half hour after, it was an explosion. It was way up where the fire was.
You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like the finale of the 4th of July over the East River.
I was about
about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds, and turned around to see the building we just got out of, antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
Trying to get some of the people out, then there was those secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
All of a sudden, it was like bang, 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 like bullet shots. And then all of a sudden, 3 tremendous explosions. And everything started coming down.
One eyewitness was standing among a crowd of people on Church Street 2.5 blocks from the South Tower when he saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these flashes accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed.
I got an eyewitness who said there was an explosion on floor 7 to 8. 7, 8. We just had another explosion. Warren Street because of the secondary explosion. We've got
Lower the camera just a little bit. You can see right at the bottom of the TV station, TV screen, billowing smoke from a bomb or explosion.
Firefighter Louis Caccioli told People Weekly, "I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in a position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building."
Nobody knew what to do. There was no clear thinking. People were just reacting to kind of save themselves
and
the
this
people
is
around them.
You're in the same location when the building comes down.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
Started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
As if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
It sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.
I don't think anybody was thinking the buildings might fall. We'd been told that these buildings were tested for 707 and all of that. I mean, good grief, of course we didn't think it was going to fall. The fire trucks and the cops were right under there. As that thing started to collapse,
when it began to come down, as you've heard Commissioner Safer indicate, the bomb squad was in, fire personnel, ambulance personnel had entered. 15 minutes after they made their entry, we heard a boom. I don't know if that was the infrastructure that was going or another explosion, and we looked up, and it, I can't even describe it. It's not even like a movie. It was so surreal.
Sample on a police car turned out dangerous. Another sample a couple of blocks away, not dangerous. But most interesting, in the mix, they are looking, they think, at specks of steel that used to be beams and elevators, marble from the lobby floor and facings. So what were once the strongest architectural elements in the 2 towers were pulverized. Large portions turned into clouds like this one.
You have 2 110-story office buildings. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big. The building collapsed to dust.
What do you think this is?
I have no idea.
What your guess is?
Pulverized cement.
Pulverized cement?
Concrete, yeah.
the concrete.
It's just, and you look, and you see, and there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel.
What happened to the concrete?
The concrete was pulverized, and I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you were on a foreign planet. All of Lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust, powder, 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Perhaps the most commonly heard conspiracy theory about 9/11 is the claim that bombs may have been in the buildings that helped to bring down the towers, as well as the planes which struck them. As wild as this conspiracy theory may sound, one building, World Trade Center Building Number 7, also known as the Solomon Brothers Building, hundreds of yards away from the Twin Towers, collapsed at 5:20 in the evening on 9/11 and received very little coverage. This building was a 47-story steel-reinforced concrete structure, which collapsed into its own footprint in 6.5 seconds, 7 hours after the Twin Towers collapsed. It became the third building in history to fall due to fires, next to the first two, which were the towers. However, it was never struck by a plane. It also was not significantly damaged by the falling towers, according to the FEMA and NIST reports. Dr. Stephen Jones is a professor of physics and has this to say about the tower.
I was amazed. It follows, and I'd looked now at dozens of demolitions just to see what they look like, what is the nature, experiments on how you bring a building down symmetrically, straight down and rapidly. You knock out the core first, the core goes down, the sidewalls lean in a little bit, and the building comes down rapidly because you've knocked out the support. Well, that's exactly how Building 7 came down. The dramatic collapse of World Trade Center 7 is something everyone ought to see. I suspect that few have actually looked at it, something that needs to be explored very carefully, but the characteristics are there. So you look at the building, you see it dip in the middle first, and the sides bow in a little bit, and then you see it come down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just like that. And right down onto its footprint. You see, that's the goal of controlled demolition. You don't want the building to tip over, which is much easier to do with explosives, actually. Just knock out the supports and let her tip. The trusses in the building made it very asymmetrical. There were 24 central columns, steel columns. For those to fail in such a way that that building would collapse in the center first and then come straight down, instead of toppling over, for instance? No.
After years of questioning and activism by the family members of victims of September 11th, thousands of government contractors, engineers, architects, and other credentialed experts have joined together and examined the collapse of the Twin Towers and have looked into Building 7. A group now calling themselves Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth combines all of these professionals and has received virtually no coverage by the mainstream media. Although media has been invited to their events, as well as over 50 different disclosure attempts set up by the family members, marches by the so-called 9/11 truthers, and press conferences, the media remains silent. A media blackout has been in effect for years, and the small reporting done on the movement has been disproportionate, misrepresentative, or condescending. Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth was started by Richard Gage, a 25-year professional architect of high-rise, steel-reinforced skyscrapers.
In order for the perimeter to fall
perfectly and symmetrically, which it pretty much does at Building 7, all of those columns have to be removed within a tenth of a second of each other. Fire cannot do that.
Another structural engineer of the over 3,500 credentialed expert members that have joined his group says he can imagine one or two columns failing.
It is possible that you could have a local failure as a result of a connection failing. But the likelihood of that failure dragging the entire building in such a fashion that all the columns would fail at the same time is an impossibility.
The entire roofline cascades down neatly into its own footprint. At the same time, jets of debris can be seen shooting out of the walls and going up. NIST can simply declare, NIST has seen no evidence that the collapse of World Trade Center 7 was caused by bombs, missiles, or controlled demolition.
In the FEMA report, I think they were fairly honest, and it's interesting as you read what they said about Building 7. So, I'm reading with great interest. At the end, they say, well, our best hypothesis, now, this is the fire and damage hypothesis. That's the only hypothesis they looked at, seriously. Okay, so our best hypothesis, they said, has only a low probability of occurrence. And I'm saying, that's right. That's exactly right. Why don't you quantify that? But they didn't quantify it. But they did admit, it has only a low probability of occurrence, and that's to their credit. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention Building 7 collapse,
The first column to collapse is column number 80, which was untouched by any structural damage. This is evident in the fall of the east penthouse, supported by column number 80. This precedes global collapse. But what happens next, several seconds later, is not so easily explained. Looking at photos of the building after its collapse, it is clear that the entire cage of interior columns failed. The structure piled into its own footprint. Shot at about 9 p.m. on September 11th. The U.S. Post Office is on the left. World Trade Center 7 stopped at the sidewalk along the post office. Building 7 was hundreds of yards away from the towers, across the street, while buildings 3 through 6 were in the immediate area under the falling debris. They received massive amounts of direct impact from the falling towers and maintained their integrity, and did not pancake. Objects do not increase momentum or inertia when they strike a force opposing them, but lose momentum and follow the path of least resistance, as is stated by the law of inertia. Building 7 housed the Office of Emergency Management, which was the office designed by Jerome Hauer to deal with New York during a terrorist attack.
From hurricanes and heat waves to bioterrorism, New York City is gearing up for the worst.
We've got PD, fire, EMS.
The emergency exercise was staged with local, state, and federal officials on hand.
To help identify the source of the outbreak.
A hypothetical outbreak caused by a deadly biological agent had been released by unknown terrorists somewhere in New York City.
Tell them to expect notification from us. We may ask them to close the system.
It wasn't the first time New York City ran an exercise reacting to a potential crisis, but it was the first to be run out of the city's new $13 million high-tech emergency operations center.
The city is better prepared than it ever has been in its history.
The new facility is located in downtown Manhattan, across the street from the World Trade Center's Twin Towers. The command center on the 23rd floor is bulletproof and bomb-resistant, with its own air supply and generators. It's linked to city airports, the Coast Guard, and the Pentagon. Computers will soon have detailed blueprints of every major building in New York City, as well as evacuation routes. Hurricanes and heat waves would be handled here, as well as terrorist attacks.
Particularly when it comes to biological terrorism, no city is where we're at.
Shortly after the bombing of the World Trade Center, New York City scrapped its existing emergency plans and began writing new ones. A couple of years later, following the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, Congress passed a law calling for 120 of the nation's largest cities to be prepared for terrorist attacks.
I think New York City is very ready, very prepared.
Though New York officials say their facility is not impenetrable, they're confident it could handle even the worst crisis imaginable.
Also in that building, the New York offices of the U.S. Secret Service.
And has confirmed reports that the CIA had an undercover office in 7 World Trade Center. One of the buildings destroyed along with the Twin Towers September the 11th. A U.S. official tells CNN the office was involved in counterterrorism and counterintelligence. The official says no CIA employees were killed in the collapse.
Number 7 World Trade Center was also the New York office of the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA ordered the building surrounded by FBI agents shortly after it collapsed.
It housed the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the joint FBI-CIA counterterrorism group that ironically tracked bin Laden. It was a spook house filled with intelligence officials. The building was over-designed to withstand serious structural damage, for it was used by the city for emergency response purposes in a terror attack. The tower was standing for about 7 hours until it came down. And when it did come down, it happened in 6.5 seconds. Now remember, buildings 3 through 6 were in the immediate area and received massive trauma. The Oklahoma City bombing showed the Murrah building was barely standing with a few core columns after it had exploded. Building 7 did not appear to have any significant damage by comparison. The Wells Fargo Center in downtown Denver is 52 stories high, while the Quest building is 53 stories, and Denver's tallest skyscraper, the Republic Plaza, 56 stories. World Trade Center Building 7 was a 47-story steel reinforced building. Next to the towers, it seemed quite small. However, it is taller than most buildings in most cities in the United States. It is roughly the size of the Quest building in the Denver skyline. News agencies quickly reported that the building fell due to fires. However, there was just one problem. CNN and NBC reported the collapse of the building around 30 minutes before it actually happened.
The complex is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing, and you, to be honest, can see these pictures a little bit more clearly than I, but building number 7, one of the buildings in this very large complex of buildings that is the Trade Center, there were, and that is the right way to put it.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were, and it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense...
As the building collapse is discussed for almost 20 minutes, the feed of Jane Stanley is cut seconds before the building actually does collapse.
Many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later.
And next thing you know, there's firemen grabbing all their equipment, and there was a whole bustle and shuffle of firemen going on. He goes over, he talks to the fireman, he comes back with his hand covered over the radio, and he's like, you know, just sit tight, calm down, calm down, you know, it's all right. He finally has this face that is like he was heartbroken. He's like, just run for your life. Kevin McPadden is a paramedic who worked in rescue and recovery on 9/11. Here is what he has to say about the building collapse of World Trade Center 7.
He went over and he talked to one of the, through all the commotion, he goes over and he asked one of the Red Cross, or one of the firefighters, what was going on. I guess, I don't know if he got an answer or not. He came back over with his hand over the radio, and it sounded like a countdown. And at the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1, and he was just saying, just run for your life, just run for your life. And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds, you heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Only a few recordings caught the clear audio of Building 7 when it went down.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something? You gotta get back to me. All right. All right? Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now. 4-1 should have taken a couple of companies that they were leaving back to us. They were stuck on the tunnel. So they must be...
Gas another. Hours after the attack, many smaller explosions rumbled through downtown.
Danny Yawenko is a controlled demolitions expert. Here's what he says about the tower collapse.
Zijn reactie op de beelden die we laten zien is onbevangen.
Zie je vanaf boven gaan? Nee, je gaat vanaf onder.
Die gaat vanaf onder, ja.
Toch?
Ja.
Ze hebben gewoon kolommen weggeblazen. Ze is nagesprongen.
Dit valt anders dan het World Trade Center.
Vind je niet dan?
Ja, je ziet het, de onderste verdiepingen gaan eerst.
Ja, en de rest zakt er gewoon in. Dus dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten?
Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Maar dit is ook op 11 september gebeurd.
Dezelfde dag?
Dezelfde dag.
Dezelfde dag? Weet je dat zeker?
Ja.
Was het zeker weten de 11e? Dat kan heel waar zijn.
7 uur nadat de World Trade Center naar beneden viel.
Ja? Hebben ze hard gewerkt.
Larry Silverstein, in an interview with PBS, claimed that the fires were unable to be controlled. So they made the decision to pull the building.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Was he referring to the building or the firefighting efforts? Were there any firefighting efforts in Building 7? And who uses this to describe that scenario? CNN aired the footage of police officers saying that they were about to blow up the building and to get back.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. The building is about to blow up. Moving back. All right, guys. We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame. Debris coming down.
Just in the last few seconds, another building, building number 7, one of the buildings in support of the World Trade Center towers, has collapsed. This is no small building, as you can see, at 47 stories. It would stand out in most American cities.
There was also footage of a foreign military unit on the scene of the World Trade Center.
To rehydrate so they can return to the parched canyon.
Building is going to collapse. Nothing information.
And it's always dangerous.
Building is going to collapse. Nothing information. Building is going to collapse. Nothing information.
no investigation was done into who this person was. Most of the steel at the World Trade Center was melted down and recycled before forensic analysts could determine what had happened in the structure to cause the failure. Why does the official story claim to this day that fires brought down this building? Those who have questioned the collapse are still called names or said to be conspiracy theorists, but many of them are not actually formulating theories, but asking legitimate questions. Many in the movement are saying that the building was blown up by explosives. Who would have wanted Building 7 to be blown up? And how did they get uninterrupted access to the towers to place these explosives? Controlled demolitions take several weeks and sometimes months to set up, especially of a building the size of 47 stories. A computer must help coordinate the structural weight, and engineers must collaborate it in advance and wire it in such a way that the building goes down correctly. The bridges in New York were closed off to travelers heading inward, so how did they bring in the explosives that day, if it is assumed that they blew it up on the day of 9/11, and that they placed those explosives the same day? There were upwards of 10,000 estimated people missing. Why would someone make the decision to pull a building 400 yards away from the towers, adding to the dust and toxicity, as well as the cleanup effort? Permits are required for such an undertaking, and how was it kept so secret, especially if no one admits to it? Someone would have needed advanced knowledge of the attacks to undertake this kind of operation, seeing as how the bombs would have been needed to have been placed in advance.
I want to tell you that we are getting word from New York right now that another building has collapsed. I understand that this is a 47-story building. Do we have pictures of it? I guess that's smoke now. Correct me if I'm wrong in the control room, please. But is that smoke coming from this third collapse? Okay, that is what we're understanding, which makes sense because it looks like the sun is going down. But the heavy black smoke once again.
Look at that.
Hopefully at this point that building was empty, but I have no way of knowing that. But I'm hoping that enough people have cleared out of downtown Manhattan so that perhaps it wasn't as full as it might be normally around 5:30 on a Tuesday.
That information, of course, take a look at that right-hand side of the screen.
It's going down right now.
There it is.
Yep.
It went down right there.
The television show, The X-Files, was based around a central theme about a secret group of men who control the world through international entities. The spin-off show of The X-Files was called The Lone Gunman, which was centered around the 3 computer hacker conspiracy theorists who were the primary source of information about the secrets of these big conspiracies and controlling secret societies for the X-Files' lead characters, FBI agents Mulder and Scully.
Hold up. Something's funky here. You're telling us the government is behind this?
You're the government.
If you're anything like your father, I knew you'd want to know.
The pilot episode story was that a military war game exercise, Scenario 12D, would be the hijacking of a commercial airliner by remote control and flying it into the World Trade Center to justify a global war on terror.
What the hell are you doing? Why can't you stay out of this? Leave me buried.
What is Scenario 12D? We know it's a war game scenario, that it has to do with airline counterterrorism. Why is that important enough to kill for?
Because it's no longer a game.
But if some terrorist group wants to act out this scenario, why target you for assassination?
Depends on who your terrorists are.
The men who conceived of it in the first place. You're saying our government plans to commit a terrorist act against a domestic airline?
There you go. Indicting the entire government as usual. It's a faction. A small faction.
For what possible gain?
The Cold War's over, John. But with no clear enemy to stockpile against, the arms market's flat. But bring down a fully loaded 727 into the middle of New York City, and you'll find a dozen tin pot dictators all over the world just clamoring to take responsibility and begging to be smart-bombed.
I can't believe it. This is about increasing arms sales. Why didn't you tell the world this? Go to the press.
You think I'd still be drawing breath 30 minutes after I made that call? The press? Who's going to run this story?
We would.
This? This is birdcage liner. Wild-eyed crap right up there with Elvis as an alien and two-headed babies.
You obviously read it.
Don't be so damn naive.
In the episode, The Continuity of Government, which is a real-life Cold War network which is commonly referred to as the shadow government, would be responsible for executing this operation. The continuity of government was set up after World War II to keep the government running in the case of a nuclear holocaust or attack on Washington. Over the years, each presidential administration has expanded the powers of the continuity of government, whose members are permanent and not elected, through security threats and national events that have been, ironically, carried out by the network itself. For instance, the Iran-Contra scandal was carried out by members of the continuity of government and resulted in the expansion of the powers that they could utilize. On 9/11, the continuity of government was officially initiated, and many speculate it may have played a role in the attacks. Figures in the continuity of government include well-known politicians like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Porter Goss, and Joe Biden. The continuity of government is classified top secret, and the public and not even Congress is allowed to review it. It is, in effect, a completely secret government that operates at the highest levels of national security, intelligence, military, and industry, with full authority to do whatever it wants without accountability. Could the X-Files spin-off show have been correct about 9/11? Well, the problem with the episode of the show is that it was aired March 4th, 2001, 6 months before 9/11.
Find anything?
The luggage hole's clear if this thing can be trusted. What'd you do, make it with your erector set?
You're absolutely sure that this is the targeted flight?
This flight was chosen primarily for its visibility. It's scheduled to pass over Manhattan on its way to Boston.
You said they intend to bring this down in the middle of New York City? What if there is no bomb?
Well, how are they going to bring it down?
The same way a dead man can drive a car.
I'm in. We got ourselves a convoy.
What's your progress?
I've hacked into the flight control system output.
With a little bit of help.
It's what the brains of the plane is telling the little black box.
Course, heading, attitude, hold, yaw, axis stabilization. What the heck's that?
Is that what it looks like?
I think it is what it looks like.
What does what look like?
Modem protocols. Remote access. Somebody on the ground's flying your plane.
Bogey, sir.
Keep your course.
Liars. Your flight's gonna make an unscheduled stop in exactly 22 minutes.
The corner of Liberty and Washington. Lower Manhattan.
World Trade Center. I'm going to crash the plane into the World Trade Center.
I'll tell the flight crew.
Dean Haglund, who played the role of Richard Ringo Langley in both series, appeared on The Alex Jones Show. Jones and Haglund talked about the Lone Gunman episode, and Haglund stated that after years of writing The X-Files, the FBI and NASA would approach Chris Carter with plots for stories. Haglund also stated that CIA agents were present at the writers' parties and often gave stories to the writers to work with. Officially, however, the writers of the episode and the series claim it was all just a coincidence.
As it said in the script, that this was to start an international war on terror.
that this was, you know, the Cold War's over, and that for the arms race to continue and keep the economy going, that they would start an international war on terror by flying the plane into the World Trade Center.
Lobby for redemption instead of corrupt commission, bailout and tax exemptions. They can't stop because that's the mission, and that's what's in them. They belly full of corrupted substance and what's for dinner, and I don't even know the half. I get to talking and they might take me like photographs. The shadows overcast, and that's how I know disasters lurking and waiting. We all agree it's the end of the world, there's no debating. My hope and trust and future for us is slowly fading, because they're never serious about human life, they only plan. I guess I'm only saying these things because I'm concerned. They bringing in the new world order, so watch and learn. The corruption, we speak the truth. Liberty and freedom, countries you can tell. Corruption, we speak the truth. Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through. The corruption, we speak the truth. That's where all those liberty and freedom, we're breaking through. Corruption, we speak the truth. Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through. The evil in the man's heart screams more for us. That's why they put us in the matrix like Morpheus. Anyway, they only generate more disgust because they rotten to the core and the core's corrupt. And as time goes, they only want more from us till our windows and doors is boarded up. Now they take your livelihood with swords and thrusts till they have you on your back nursing swords and cuts. Now they working on your mental faculties. They want you working in the brave new factory, and then gradually you'll forget the past to see. Maybe that's the way that it has to be. The corruption, we
flowing like lava, they say, in the basements of all three World Trade Centers.
Corruption, we speak the truth. Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through. The corruption, we speak the truth. Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through. Corruption, we speak the truth. Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through. You'll never take away the freedom my creator gave to me. Wait for me, we'll use what we create and see. Your whole empire fall into the lakes and seas and oceans. You can't stand face to face with me. The potion that they try to make you drink is potent. It's time to turn the tables, the deception is over. Yo, somebody had to turn the lights on you, and now I hope the whole world turns the light on too. There'll be no more shadows for you to hide in. The weapon we use is true to enlighten. The lightning chose to strike right when the evil forces come together to frighten. There are many of them, but they are mortal men. Don't fear, those who are with us are more than them. Now we contemplate strategy and war with them. This is a battle that we cut out the core to win. The corruption, we speak the truth. Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through.
Helicopters coming in.
Corruption, we speak the truth.
would help the government with potentially their biggest problem. Us, we're going to show the real human cost of this war and occupation that are hard to measure with dollars.
The Federal Reserve is the culprit.
Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through. Liberty and freedom, we're breaking through.